So hello and welcome. This is a short podcast series from the University of Southampton and the University of Leeds, and we're going to be talking all things extended project qualification over the next 3 episodes. This first episode, we're going to look at piloting the EPQ in your school. So we're going to look at some of the benefits of the qualification, some strategies to embed it, and some support you can draw on the way. So particularly if you're a school that doesn't yet offer the EPQ but would like to, this is hopefully the podcast for you. My name is Dr. Richard Penny, and I'm joined here by Dr. Becki Nash, also from the University of Southampton, and Jenny Clements, who's a teacher from the Swain Park School and EPQ expert all round. I don't know if you guys want to just say hello quickly.
Yeah, so hello everyone, my name's Dr. Becki Nash, and as Rich said, we both work on the Learn With Us transition programme at the University of Southampton, so many years of supporting the EPQ.
Hello, yes, I'm Jenny Clements. Thank you, Rich, for that kind introduction. I feel very lucky to work with you both again, and thank you, Becki. Yes, I'm a secondary phase English teacher with whole school responsibilities for project work, both at key stages 3, 4 and 5. And I also oversee UCAS and early applicant responsibilities. So I'm pleased to be with you this afternoon to discuss one aspect of all those lovely roles I have.
Super, thank you both. So I'll kick straight off with just a quick introduction to what we mean by extended project qualification, just so we're all on the same page. So the extended project qualification, or EPQ, as I'm sure we'll all refer to it, it's a qualification students usually do in year 12, but can also do in year 13 or often complete in year 13. It is, as the project would suggest, like a larger independent piece of work that students undertake. It usually takes the form of a 5,000 word essay or a product or artifact, both of which have to be based in demonstrated research that a student has undertaken. And I think one of the interesting points about it is that it's on a topic of the students' choosing, using methods of their choosing. So it's very much a project that draws upon students' ability and develops their ability to work, plan, research and develop independently. Though, as you'll hear, it is supported within school by a taught element and by some teacher supervision along the way. So we'll talk a bit about the benefits of this qualification, and I'll go on to ask both Becki and Jenny about kind of how this might be instituted in the school on a pilot basis. If you wanted to try this qualification, how that could be done sort of feasibly and simply, and how you can draw on support along the way. But just to expand upon that question of benefits, sort of like what's the benefit to the school, what's the benefit to the students? So I was going to ask Becki if you could say a little bit on this, just based on your work with schools. Why do schools often begin the EPQ, and why do they tend to stick with it once they've offered it?
Thanks, Rich. So I think there's a number of benefits to the extended project that obviously expands far beyond the reach of the kind of level 3 qualification phase. And I mean, from an institutional basis, at the University of Southampton, we have previously gathered quite a bit of research around the benefits of the EPQ in terms of that transition from further education into higher education, and the effects that the EPQ can have on not only the retention of students in that first year, but also their progression and their ultimate attainment as well. And the picture has always been pretty positive in that regard. So on the whole, students who come through the University of Southampton, regardless of that EPQ grade profile that they come in on, are less likely to drop out. They are likely to progress with slightly higher first year marks than their non-EPQ counterparts. And actually, across the duration of any degree program, there tends to be those slightly higher grades that are attained, which results in higher proportions of students who have originally come through with an EPQ graduating with a higher proportion of first class degrees and 2-1 degrees. I mean, anecdotally as well, the students that we've worked with within the university who have done EPQs have often fed back the benefits of that with regards to those key transition skills, such as enhanced confidence upon entering higher education, and those really key academic skills like critical thinking, the ability to go out independently, research and construct an essay, presenting, and also the skill that everyone just loves, academic referencing. And I think on the basis of conversations that we've had frequently with teachers who coordinate or supervise the EPQ, they're often really positive about the effects that it can have on their students. So not only with the view to them successfully progressing into higher education, but also in relation to their confidence within school or college, when undertaking their other level 3 qualifications as well. And I know, Rich, that you'll talk about that later on.
Yeah, thanks, Becki. Is there anything you'd like to add, Jenny, at this point? Just anything you've kind of observed within your school that's been maybe kind of cultural or to the students' benefit around the EPQ?
Yes, and I think what Becki is saying is a really sort of comprehensive overview of everything that you can get from project learning, and what the EPQ brings I think is very, very special. And when you talk about benefits, I also think about the word value, and what that means. And I think that's quite a complex process for students actually to recognise not just the academic value, but also the personal value, and what it is that you learn as part of the process of project learning. So I think particularly that there's value in allowing students to be self-regulators of their learning and to explore different ways of developing knowledge. So to be a little bit brave, perhaps to go out of more conventional ways of understanding something. So primary data, methods that you might engage in on a personal level outside of school that you can actually bring into something now that you're doing as part of the school qualification. I think in terms of the value of curiosity, really, I think this is one way of demonstrating curiosity in an excellent way. And I know, as Becki said later on, I'm sure Rich will talk about how it can be used within school to prepare students for various qualifications that they might go towards. And when I was thinking about my own experiences, I'm actually working with a student this year who's interested in Norse mythology, which seemed really quite varied. And I was thinking, where has this come from? He said he remembers a very animated primary school teacher talking about Norse mythology, and he said he's been hooked on it ever since, and now is the time that he actually can go back to it and explore it. And it made me think that actually through EPQ you can link previous experiences to create new ones in the present. And I think that this is the value that this brings. It's linking all sorts of learning experiences and producing something new and exciting for undergrad level.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really interesting way of thinking about it, because it can absolutely be a link between both past, present and future. So present interests or past interests. And I think, yeah, as mentioned, one of the things looking forward is that there's a clear link between doing an EPQ and strengthening your application to university as well. So I think the other way that benefits obviously both students and schools as well is in, you know, helping students achieve what they want to in terms of university applications, or indeed actually other applications beyond school as well. So EPQs can be used really as evidence for also, you know, applications to apprenticeships or even students who move straight into careers. Particularly though from the university angle, just because that's where we're coming from, there's really strong evidence that the EPQ does support applications. And I think the way to think about this and the way to encourage students to kind of use their EPQ is to speak about those skills that Becki and Jenny have just laid out. So if as part of a personal statement, or even more so in an interview, or even particularly for things like selection days for medicine courses, your ability to talk about your independent learning, your project management, your time management, and that's before you even speak about any research, essay writing or referencing skills. Because the EPQ is a really tangible qualification, that does an awful lot of work to strengthen those applications. The other thing as well is that increasingly, and in response to this, you'll see universities quite often offer grade reductions now in return for particular qualifications on EPQs. So a lot of universities will say, for example, at A or B or above, they will drop a grade in terms of what they're asking for. So perhaps turn, say, 2 A's and a B into an A and 2 B's. So there's a lot of benefits, I think, to be had to the EPQ. I don't know if either of you want to kind of sort of add anything else. I don't know whether I've missed something there.
I don't think you've missed anything, but I would like to just slightly elaborate on the point around the medicine selection days, because I think that this is one of the things that students and teachers alike sometimes can be a little bit concerned about, is if they've got a prospective medic who is doing an EPQ. Sometimes they're worried that it may be that the EPQ detracts too much from those other subjects that they're doing, and they can't quite see the benefit of undertaking an EPQ in addition to doing those, you know, the biology, the chemistry, and whatever else they need to do in order to obtain a place on a medicine program. What I will say from the perspective of someone who sits on medicine selection panels quite frequently for the University of Southampton, it is often one of the things that sticks out the most when you are looking through a huge pile of personal statements. You know that these students already predicted the grades to kind of get into the university, and so what you're looking for when you are working your way through these applications is not the reams and reams of work experience, because they've all got that. It's those little things that you can pick out as being fairly unique and then you can draw the information out of that prospective student during the interview. And the EPQ is such a fantastic way of doing that, because they are often about such different things. And in terms of some of the interviews I've sat on, you can just see the student kind of like they light up when you talk about their research to them, because they want to tell you more about it. And so I think just to try and allay some of those fears around medicine students and the EPQ, because quite often I think the benefits are not necessarily seen to be as much, because you don't get that grade reduction. It is a time-consuming project. But at Southampton, in the third year of medicine, you're going to do a research-based project, and the EPQ obviously is quite a nice introduction to some of the skills that you will need to develop along the way. And sometimes those do take a backseat to those early clinical skills that students will focus on. So from the perspective of medicine, I always try and get that across to teachers and to students.
And I think, Becki, I absolutely echo with what you're saying there, and the importance perhaps of seeing long term where these developing foundational skills can take students. And I was just thinking from a school's point of view as well, and what we can do more of. I think I know we're working on this as a sixth form here, is building up what we call a supra-curricular portfolio, or perhaps super curricular, depending on the language that teachers are using. And as you suggest, in medicine, veterinary medicine, and all subjects really require that level of engagement, where you can show that you are looking beyond the taught curriculum. So looking at what's online to broaden your interests, and the EPQ, rightly so, is one way to do that. And in the world we're in at the moment, I think showing that interest and using time that you might have in the summer holidays to get on with project learning and strengthening your application is excellent, but just in sense of love of a subject, which I think is important.
That's great. No, I think that's a really good overview. I mean, if you're both happy, then I think we'll jump sort of straight into what I think is probably going to be the crux of this session then, and that's kind of answering the question of what next. If you're sort of sold on you like the idea of the EPQ, you like the idea of students getting to research a topic of their own and the skills that come with it, how do you kind of set this up? And so I think what we want to think about here is kind of probably a pilot program within most schools for the first year. But I think there's a lot of sort of aspects of that to unpick. And I think, Jenny, if I could sort of field these to you as a teacher, EPQ coordinator, I think that would be great if you could give us your insight. I mean, I think the first question that came to mind for me when thinking about this is kind of, will who and how many? So I think a really important step to clarify is kind of which kind of students you might want to do this qualification, and really like what's a kind of a good number to start off with in a pilot. I mean, how do you have like, I guess, enough students that you have almost kind of like a cohort and a sense of kind of almost like community within that cohort, but not so many that particularly in a first year you're overwhelmed. So I don't know if you've got a take on that, if you'd like to sort of follow on.
Yeah, no, and I must say, actually, Rich, thank you for giving me the chance to challenge myself here, because I think it's so important that we can reflect on how far we've come. And I'm looking back now to think about how I've grown what I hope is a really vibrant research culture within the sixth form, but it does take time. I think that's fair to say. And I know, having attended your conferences over the years, you've allowed EPQ members of staff to talk about what has gone well, what they could improve, and that's a really good space. So this is another opportunity this year, so thank you for me to do this. I think it's when you mentioned about the types of students that you might want to attract to project learning, I think the same can almost be applied to teachers of project learning, and being brave perhaps to try something that you may not have engaged yourself as learners. I think we assume if we're talking about projects that most people might have a connection to what it means to learn in that type of way. And I think introducing teachers as well as students gradually is a really good idea through piloting. And I've often thought to myself, how do I make something visible that's really important to me? And that visibility within the school is something that you can grow and develop. And I think starting at a level that you feel comfortable with regarding sort of staff and confidence with them and getting on board as well is really important. So I remember when I started out with the EPQ, so I was here when the sixth form opened, so that was something that I'd sort of nurtured and grown, and that was with the HPQ lower down as well. And originally we started thinking about how we would begin. The HPQ, I must admit, was something that I started with first, and that was piloted at a much smaller level, so that was around 12 pupils or so. So we kept it quite small, but I had opportunities for what I called project launches. So I would invite students to take part in an afternoon of sharing ideas, being engaged and interested. I think I didn't want it to be too content heavy at that stage. It was, what's your interests? What are you motivated by? Is there something that we can extend further and make those links perhaps to different ways of learning. So I started off with very small groups of students, and from there I did have the confidence to start on a much sort of larger scale with the EPQ. But I think that you can absolutely start piloting the EPQ in a similar way, which is by using a smaller group of pupils. But the inclusivity for me is at the heart of what I do. So casting a research net beyond just a small group of pupils that might get a certain grade or might like this. I've learned over the sort of 8 years now, really, of looking at research students, that whilst you might look on paper and think this group of pupils might seem to do well at project learning, if they don't necessarily have an interest, a passion, you don't want to do the opposite and turn them off of learning.
Could I just on that's really interesting. Like, so would you do you think there's a benefit to maybe having pupils self-refer, so make this something that they might apply for rather than something that a teacher might select in the first cohort?
Yes, I think so. And I think also the openness for this. So I would originally with the EPQ every year, I offer it out to the whole group. And typically we have students that might have more of a professional interest, and like you say, this could absolutely support that pathway and more of an academic UCAS link. And I launch it for everybody, and I allow that accessibility for all. I think that was quite important for me, that it wasn't just one group, one person. It was everybody on different levels and different thinking. So yeah, I think asking students to opt in is a really important thing, because as we all know, I think getting perhaps pushed along a route doesn't always get the best out of us. So voluntary contributions, I think, is a good way for your EPQ journey to begin.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think probably in Becki and my experience, I think we've seen smaller groups, sort of maybe like 5 or 6 students do the EPQ. I think the risk with starting with a very small group is you potentially have dropout always, which is just a feature of running this kind of qualification. Not every student who begins it will carry it through. And that the risk then is you end up with sort of small groups of 1 or 2 students, and that obviously then you lose a lot of the group dynamics. I mean, I guess we sort of, and this can be quite a short answer, we're sort of saying probably sort of like maybe sort of 10 to 20 is a reasonable pilot size group. Do you think that's about right? Or
yeah, I think so. And also with regards to staffing as well, getting staff on board, gradually building up that research culture, and getting more people to feel confident in what they're doing, whether or not they have lots of experience or not. So yes, I think so. And as I said, I started originally with the HPQ as a small group, but I think if I didn't have that, I would certainly have started a small group for the EPQ to begin with.
That's great. No, that's really helpful. So okay, we've got an idea of sort of like roughly how we might recruit. So I guess the next thing I think that is a really big concern often for teachers is sort of how this would fit in and run across the school year. And I guess, again, if you don't mind, Jenny, this is a sort of a 2-part question. I guess the first one is just a question about kind of when you would start and finish this, sort of at what point in year 12 you might launch and at what point you might aim to wrap up. And then I think it's probably the thornier question of what you might require or ask for in terms of timetable time or protected time that might be able to support this. And just again, like probably bearing in mind we won't get everything we ask for, what would be a good approach for sort of a first try of an EPQ?
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good question. And I think we've learned more than ever this year that life happens. And the idea of trying to fit everything in can sometimes feel even more daunting. And you mentioned about dropout, and that's something that I think people are mindful of in terms of supervisors, people leading qualifications, and how they can support students. So we have quite a long time scale for us, but I know that it can work very successfully in different ways. So we introduce in September this 3PQ. For more eager students with the induction week, we might say over the summer, absolutely have a look and see what you can get in terms of preparation. But we start more in September, and we actually finish January time of year 13. So it's about 15 months or so. But within that, I do allow flexibility. So students that want to get it done slightly earlier to have it quite contained in year 12, they come back after the summer holidays and they submit. And that also frees up some supervisors potentially to support other projects. And then I have a later deadline around sort of January, February time. So for us, for the life happens idea, for students, when you say, look, actually, if you know you're going to be really snowed under with work or something happens, you don't have to fear about your project. You can come back to it. Sort of keep it going gradually, maybe not commit as much while you're going through whatever it is you need to, and then come back to it. And that seems to have worked quite well mentally, I think, as a release. In terms of timeline and time, again, I've spoken to colleagues at different schools, and sometimes teachers are given an allocated slot to meet students in their timetable. And Becki alluded to this idea of perhaps sort of being part of this and not always wanting to be a forced sense of supervision. I don't think that is the case. I think people will get absolutely caught up in the joy of seeing students invest in projects. I think that will quickly disappear if you're ever worried about supervising. It's a fantastic thing. But in terms of what you could do, yes, staff could have a timetabled session depending on allocation. But what I've tried to do this year is we don't actually have that as part of our timetabling. I've never had that. And it's also a strength and a challenge. And what I find is over years of doing this, I've built up what I now call an EPQ supervisor directory. And I put this into place within lockdown, actually. So across the school, I got teachers to put down what their interests are, if they wouldn't mind teachers from their point of view being approached by staff, by students. So staff would put in their interests, and then students would get in touch with them and say, what could I read? What would be a good thing to do? So I have a bank of staff. I'm also, through doing that, able to look at where maybe supervisors could have a co-supervisory relationship, because the demands on teachers' time are huge. So to make sure that there's support for staff and students, I say, well, perhaps this supervisor could be your main supervisor. This supervisor could be there to support more structural aspects. So we've tried to do that. So in an ideal world, I think it would be great to have more sort of timetable time for teachers. But reality, I think sometimes project work, it could be a quick meeting after school for 10 minutes, and that might absolutely help the student get to the next level. It doesn't always have to be, I think, a dedicated time on a timetable. Supervision looks very differently. It could be emails, it could be quick conversations, but a range of different ways to do it. So please don't be put off, I guess, by restrictions of timetabling or times. Project work happens, and it happens in a great way for different students at different times.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something, again, let me know if your experiences differ, Becki, but I think we quite often meet with schools in after school sessions and occasionally in sort of lunchtime sessions, just because that's when the free time is. And I think the long-term plan in those schools is to have the EPQ timetable. And I think that's, ideal if it can be achieved, but it's perfectly possible to deliver the EPQ in the kind of like those slots in between. And like you say, Jenny, to sort of, use either shorter meetings or email, or increasingly, I guess, sort of like video conferencing potentially to do that. I mean, I guess the two ways that colleagues can kind of feed in is one, like you just mentioned, then it's helping supervise students. So, students will come up with their topic ideas, and rather the coordinator, sort of have to deal with 20 of those. You'll ask supervising colleagues to kind of discuss those ideas with students. I guess the other way colleagues can help often is with the delivery of the taught element. So the EPQ coordinator will also deliver a package of skills along the way for the students. So they won't be directly speaking to their EPQs, but they'll be talking about things like research skills, essay writing, planning, and time management. So I guess, are there resources within the school? I know, for example, some schools draw upon their libraries quite heavily here. Are there sort of resources within the school and colleagues that you've been able to draw upon in that regard as well?
Yeah, I think so, and I agree with you. Your librarian can be an absolute asset, I think, to these types of projects. So certainly get on board, and they'll hopefully really enjoy sharing their expertise. I put together over the years what I call sort of EPQ companions, so previous completed projects, any sessions, as you say, Rich, that have been designed to help with the development of skills, setting targets, and when it needs to be reflective, resourceful. So all of those things, I think it does help staff and students having something with them that they can take away that's tangible. And that comes from attending sessions like these, from getting ideas from different teachers, and putting together very clear resources, really, when introducing students and staff to project language. So what does it mean by sources at a different level, bias, being critical, as Becki said earlier, and what that means in terms of questioning. So yeah, I think having something that you put together that you can constantly refer to is helpful.
And I think, just Becki, if you could just, if I could just throw this one at you as well, I think there is increasingly support that you'll get from universities as well. I don't know if do you want to just give a quick rundown of this as well? Because I think it's not just that you're on your own as a teacher. There's not only support in school, but universities are very keen to support the taught parts of the EPQ also.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, the Lumber Transition Programme at Southampton is long established, and I guess we have been historically fairly unique in the type of support that we offer out to schools. But of course, we aren't alone in that offer anymore. And there are some fabulous things being done across the sector. So obviously our lovely colleagues at Leeds offer a really wide-ranging programme of support to their teachers, and in their podcast episodes, I'm sure that they will elaborate on that. There are other universities as well that may not go out into schools or do virtual things and deliver directly, but they have resources available for teachers to download and kind of implement into their own taught sessions in whatever way they see fit, really. So one example that springs to mind there is the University of Manchester. They've got a lot of downloadable resources that teachers can use in whatever way they kind of wish. They just make those openly available. There are other universities as well that do offer something very similar to us in regards to previously in pre-pandemic times would kind of consist of them coming out and doing taught skills and also welcoming students onto their campuses to use some of those resources and facilities like their libraries. And so the University of Greenwich is one example there that have a really fantastic program in place. So, you know, increasingly what we're seeing is kind of specialist assistance and support from universities that ensure that teachers who are either seasoned EPQ coordinators and supervisors or brand new to that kind of role. We're always happy to field inquiries from new schools, and anything that we can kind of do to help alleviate some of the potential stresses of taking on a new qualification in the first instance. You know, more often than not, universities are offering that element of support now.
Yeah, that's great. No, I think that, and the last thing to say as well is that whichever exam board you're with, they'll also offer support resources and sometimes templates to kind of guide you through the paperwork and the marking that goes with the qualification. So, I mean, I think this is obviously, like we said, quite a sort of skeleton approach. But I mean, I think the offering of the EPQ within the school can be as straightforward as identifying some students whom you think it will work for, and sort of contacting a small group of them. It can, as Jenny's mentioned, work both kind of within or without of the timetable. And it's something that actually, yeah, the sell to colleagues, like on paper, you know, the asking colleagues to do extra work is something that in any workplace is never popular. But actually, that really isn't necessarily true with the EPQ, because I think the kind of conversations that supervisors are going to be having are interesting. Essentially, they are about things that students are passionate about. They are about things that students are keen on. And the role of the supervisor is really to be a sort of a listener or a soundboard, really, at that stage. And I think even if there's skepticism at first, I think when students start to engage in this process with students, I think they often find some of their most rewarding sort of teaching moments come from them. So it's, yeah, there's that element. And then within the school and these other resources, there's a lot of support out there to kind of design what you're going to teach students, when you're going to teach them, and how you're going to keep up the project admin. I mean, I guess the sort of probably the final question then, but still probably quite a large one, is then kind of, so we're kind of hoping at this point you've you know, we're a teacher perhaps who's got some motivations. You know, you want to do the EPQ and you like the sound of what it can offer students in terms of engaging their, you know, their curiosity and the skills it develops. And we've now got a rough idea of what the basics of a program work like. I guess the idea that the last sort of hurdle is sort of how you then pitch that and how you have these conversations within schools. And I guess we're thinking particularly here with sort of senior leadership teams. How do you engage perhaps people higher up in your schools to kind of support and enable this? And I guess I'll again throw this back to you, Jenny, if that's okay. But I guess it's kind of, how do you find synergies of interest between yourself and school priorities, and what kind of sort of language or sort of like verbiage can be useful in that regard?
No, it's and as you suggest, Rich, it's a really interesting topic, and that communication and why it's so important to have that support on every level, I think, within schools. The context that we're in at the moment, maybe it's more useful just to draw from where we all are. And I know from within schools, we've worked really hard on different levels to try and reconnect students with school and learning and what it means to be part of a community within school. Teachers might be familiar with expressions such as reconnect, recover and resilience, and making sure that within our schools we're supporting students in all aspects of returning. And for me, I think project work is a fantastic opportunity to do that. So when we're talking about the benefits, the value, as we were at the beginning of our conversation, SLT at the moment, I think in terms of priorities, it is making sure that students are happy and engaged in their learning once more. And I think that project work is a fantastic way to get students engaged on what matters to them, and to get them working on topics that they can really feel are purposeful. And that is something that is really key. So in terms of selling this, I think it's not just about the really important academic development that will see them into the future, but it's also about the here and now moment, and making sure that students do have something that they feel they can be excited about, and know that what they're thinking about and engage with is being explored in school as well as outside. So yes, for me, that would be really important, I think, to say that this is a way of contributing to that really important recovery and reconnection for staff and students, actually.
That's a really good point. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think that was true before the pandemic, but obviously is especially true now. I mean, I think just really quickly, a couple of things that I've seen, I'll invite you to do the same, Becki. I think one thing that often is useful as well is I think potentially through governor boards, parent governors and parents. I think when parents hear about the benefits, particularly with the university admissions, I think they can often become a force that kind of lobbies for an EPQ and lobbies for support in teaching it. And I do think probably that the link to university is something that a lot of schools are keen to develop, because I think that can have spillover benefits elsewhere as well. So if you can cooperate with a local university on delivery, that potentially deepens cooperation with that university. I don't know if Becki, if there's other things you've seen that sort of teachers can lean on.
Mostly, I think parents' evening. So you've kind of alluded to this already, Rich, but I think the value of doing a kind of a parents' evening where you introduce the EPQ not only gives the parent an introduction to what the qualification actually is, which is a little different to, those other level 3 qualifications, but it also gives them an opportunity to discuss a subject of passion with their child, and being able to kind of keep that momentum outside of schooling could possibly be a really beneficial thing. I think that as long as they're not getting too involved, but I think parent evenings where you can kind of pitch the EPQ is perfect in terms of not only getting parents on board, but also other members of SLT as well.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Well, I mean, I think that's really good. We'll kind of leave things there, because I think the goal here has been to kind of like keep this short but focused. But just to say thank you to both you, Jenny, and you, Becki, for taking part. I think that's been a lot of really helpful advice. And I hope, just from a kind of a listener point of view, if you're a teacher who has been thinking about the EPQ, or you're hearing about it now maybe for the first time, I think just what we want to reiterate is that it's something that there are really, really clear benefits. It's a joy to be a part of in many ways as a teacher. You really see, I think, kind of education at its purest, and students often at their most motivated. And I think there are such a variety of kind of models and scales upon which it can be delivered in school that I think there's a lot of ways for you to find a framework that will achieve this. We should have mentioned as well, actually, there are various EPQ support groups out there. I make them sound like a sort of crisis group, but I mean Facebook groups and that kind of thing, where teachers do share resources, and there's a lot of people very willing to give advice. So it's something that is very, very launchable. We, for one, will be very happy to sort of take any questions you've got. So we'll make sure our contact details are appended to this. But if you did want to get in touch and follow up on any of this, I'm sure we'd be very happy to speak with you on that. But other than that, I'll just say thank you for listening, everyone. And we'll have second and third parts of this podcast series coming out in due course. One of those will look more deeply at developing the EPQ in your school, and we'll be looking at marking and moderation further down the line, talking about how to prepare for that, and how to make the most of the great work your students have done. But thanks very much to both you, Becki and Jenny, again, and I hope that's been helpful. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.